Video game backlogs are an easy trap to fall into. As we grow older, be it on sale or word of mouth, we end up with more games than we have time for. As a kid, when you had a game, you played the everlasting life out of it, multiple replays, maybe even 100% in a title, but nowadays in our adult years, we're lucky to even get to the credits. Which is why today, I've put together 7 handy ways to get you back in control of your gaming journey. Whether you're trying to get through the classics you missed out on back in the day, or are keeping up with the constant cycle of current releases, or maybe even you're a gamer trying to experience both old and new, there should be something here for you. With the season of sales and people buying games more now than at any other point in the year being among us, let's get started and take a look at some advice to help you tackle your ever-growing gaming backlog. For my first bit of advice, we have to value your gaming time. What I mean by this is acknowledge to yourself when you have time for gaming and how you actually spend it. For instance, personally speaking, I've completely stopped when it comes to playing online multiplayer games. They've kind of gone downhill over the years and the communities aren't what they used to be. The next time your friend group is online and you're forced to hop into a team-based shooter you frankly don't care about, or are wasting away doing dailies in whichever gacha game, just know that this time, right now, could be moments you spend playing a fully realized single-player game that you've had waiting for you on your backlog. If you're struggling with your friend group only wanting to play the same game, then maybe try streaming to them. It's surprising, but some of my favourite gaming experiences have either been from playing in front of an audience of friends or watching someone I know play a game I love. It's a good way to keep a friend group active and doubles as a means to get you through your backlog. I've also noticed it motivates people more to want to play their backlog since it now doubles as a social interaction. Another issue I sometimes see from people who want to tackle their backlog but don't value their gaming time is when they would rather replay the same game over and over or play mods, ROM hacks or randomizers. Sure, those games are great, but you're never going to chip away at your backlog if you always favour what you're used to, which brings me on to my next point. Advice number 2, step outside your comfort zone. This is one of those things that takes time but equally needs to be filled with the desire and wanting to experiment more when it comes to the kinds of games you play. I'm a very adamant believer in the fact that you're not born liking what you like. A lot of people usually stick with what they know, and that is typically what they were nostalgic towards as a kid or teenager. What I mean by this point is that you should always seek out experiences that take you away from your comfort zone and to never judge a book or game in this case by its cover. Some of the best games I've ever played were from recommendations by family and friends that I never would have tried otherwise, like Bloodborne, or earlier this year I played Red Dead Redemption 2 for the first time, which was an incredible experience and it had me by the end in tears. I tend to prefer more fantasy animated games, so these recommendations really gave me the desire to look further away from what I'm used to and motivated me to get through my backlog. Also, after you've moved away from your comfort zone, try to embrace this fact. It might seem overwhelming at first, but it's well worth it. The newly added variety will really help motivate you onwards to tackling the different kinds of games on your backlog that might not have clicked with you before. It will also better hone your taste and give you a broader understanding of the different kinds of gaming experiences that there are out there. This next point is going to get a little controversial, but please hear me out. Next bit of advice is to remove yourself from services like Game Pass and PS Plus Extra. I could make a whole separate rant on these services, but what I mean by this is that these formats, in my opinion, devalue a lot of what gaming has to offer. Similar to short form content, they value this idea of playing just a fraction of a game, then dropping it and moving on to something else. Quality over quantity should always be key when it comes to a backlog. You don't want to say you played a bunch of games for the sake of it. You're way better off actually finishing what you can by getting to the credits, which will give you a much more substantial experience. I also just hate how these services treat longer experiences like JRPGs. The amount of titles that get taken off places like Game Pass almost every month makes it an unreliable resource to use when it comes to playing games and actually finishing them. Sure, for online games they're alright, but backlogs typically only consist of single player experiences, which is where these services do not shine in my opinion. I'd even somewhat argue this fact with emulation. If you ever emulate a title, just make sure you go one at a time and don't immediately download an entire library, since you're making this already difficult task impossible at that point. Also, on the topic of devaluing games, be very careful when it comes to buying collections. There can be great ways to get an entire series for cheap, but similar to the catalog format of Game Pass, they can also intentionally or not devalue games. A good example of this is, let's say for instance you brought the Kingdom Hearts collection, which makes sense if you're interested in this series since it's the only modern means of owning the games. You can't buy them individually. Back in the day, fans had to wait after playing the first game, and slowly over time in a more natural sense through hype cycles and waiting on entries, they connected closer to these series. Whereas Whereas with a collection, it's designed in a format similar to TV shows where it's positioned in a way to be binged all at once. But with a lot of game series, especially JRPGs, you simply can't binge them, which can easily lead to burnout with these kinds of collections and can maybe even start to feel like a chore to get through now that they're all together opposed to their original intent of having fans wait between entries. You'll be surprised, but playing a game on release alongside fans with the original hype cycle can really motivate you to play through a title opposed to way later when the game is no longer current news. So long story short here is that if you want to buy collections or bundles on sale, remember to take your time, and like my previous point, it might be a good idea to add some variety between playthroughs with different titles to avoid burnout. Unless you end up like how I was when playing through the Trail series for the first time and it just clicks with you immediately, in which case happy binging. The worst thing you can possibly do to yourself with this hobby is reach burnout. I can't stress that enough here. Anyway, moving on. Advice number 4, make a list. I really enjoy doing this. It's a nice way to cement the games you've beaten and to document them. It puts a nice bow on any gaming experience by adding it to a greater objective, which should always be to play as many games as possible. For some people, this might seem like a chore. You have sites like Backlog where you have to log in and individually add each and every game you played, which honestly isn't my thing. Allow me to show you my list of games that I've beaten this year. Yep, no fancy pictures, just a month and title in default text. This to me is more effective than using these sites. Just get your phone out whenever you've beaten a game and add the title. I started doing this back in 2023 and found it very effective. Also, you shouldn't try adding previous games here. That's another trap I see people fall into and adds to the tedium. Just decide to yourself that you're going to start a list to better keep track of the games you've beaten and stick to it from that point onwards. It takes like 20 seconds after beating a game to jot it down. The whole process overall just motivates me more to want to make this list bigger and bigger. Now, you're probably wondering why I don't write down my actual backlog and just the games I've beaten, and that will be explained in my next bit of advice. Advice number 5, enjoy this journey. I think a list is great when it's used as a sign of personal achievement after finishing a game, but writing down what you own and sticking to it makes the whole thing feel like a chore for me personally. I find when it comes to acknowledging my actual backlog, it's best to buy physical over digital. Just ignore this point if you're a PC gamer. The thing is, with a physical game, it looks back at you. Its existence is a reminder of what you're missing out on. Also, a mini tip here, but try to only take off the shrink wrapper when starting a game. It's the small joys, and finally unleashing a game from its clutches to start it really adds to the experience. Also, another small thing to keep in mind here is to know the difference between a wish list and a backlog. A backlog to me is games you started and not finished, or games that you own. Things get a little out of hand when you start to factor in games that you don't have access to. You definitely want to keep things manageable and realistic. We have a more psychological point up next, and one that I think is a trap that we all fall into. For advice number 6, that is to not romanticize this hobby. So one thing I hear from a lot of people who throw off their backlog is that they will play when the time is right. What I'm here to say is that the right time is now. Sure, in an ideal world, I'd love to start a title with 0 interruptions and no stress of real world worries in the perfect environment, but that is rarely or more realistically never the case. All I'm saying is that when the next 3D Zelda game drops, there could be a meteor heading for planet Earth or anything. I'm going to be doing all I can to play that. But in all seriousness, you should be a little more assertive with yourself when it comes to this hobby, and maybe even a little stubborn. I'll do what I have to in my day-to-day life as a human, but when it comes to all passions, you've got to push for it. That 100-hour JRPG is never going to get finished if you let your friends dictate what you do in your free time, which is also a trap I see people fall into. Real-world distractions suck, but thanks to the beauty of modern gaming conveniences, we can take these experiences around with us. This point is a bit of a grey area, and I understand that putting off your backlog for quote the right time is a bad habit that leads people to never pursuing the titles that they want to play through, so hopefully this advice here has helped. For my final piece of advice at number 7, we have to relax and figure out your pace. For me personally, I have to play a game one at a time. Even shorter experiences I'd rather give my whole focus to until reaching the credits and then moving on to the next title. It doesn't feel right to me having like 5 games going on at once. It fries my attention span, and once again leads to the idea of devaluing a gaming experience, which is something I would say you definitely want to avoid. There is more to this point. For instance, to discover your pace, you'll want to stick through the good and bad gaming experiences. There is this strange mindset I see with people online that dictate when you should drop a game. It's the $1,000,000 question really. Some would say after the first couple of hours, similar to a TV series, how much of something should you experience before you can say that it's truly not for you and that you are justified in saying it? Well, for me personally, personally, and this might be out there for some, I would argue that playing a game you don't like to the end can be an amazing way to establish your pacing when it comes to gaming. It takes a bit of mental discipline, and I get it isn't for most people, but I would say it's worth pursuing. Some genres in games I would say have an acquired taste. A genre I used to hate but is now my all-time favourite, JRPGs, is a really good example of this. Many people have put off this genre by the long runtime, repetitive battling, and out there stories, but for me, after seeing these experiences through to the end, I've come to really appreciate them over the years. This advice isn't going to be for everyone, but a recurring point in this video is for you to want to experiment more, and I would say that challenging what you perceive as bad whilst pretentious is a good idea to at least try to see if it's not for you. At the end of the day, your taste will be better for it, and I think there's value in pursuing what makes a game bad or not for you. Also, with this point, I don't mean to go out there and play an objectively bad or buggy game just to try something that other people swear is good, or a mixed game to better get an idea of this. It's best to do this than to just rely on an obnoxious review score tied to a game dictating its worth. There's nuance here, and sometimes a game can be seen by the mainstream as bad but might mean a whole lot to you personally, which is worth seeking out. And that wraps it up for my advice on breaking your video game backlog. Hopefully some of this advice has proven useful in getting the most out of the games that you already own. Do you have any advice on methods you found helps overcoming a backlog? Let me know in the comment section. Also, any feedback on this video would be appreciated. Thanks for watching and have a nice rest of your day.